faith and action. What guides you when you need to make those decisions quickly? We live in a fast-paced world. I'm here today with the Reverend Dr. John Joseph Mastandrea, who is a spiritual director and has been a personal mentor and leader to me. And it's an important question, I think, because we live in a world that's just moving so quickly. All right, we're going to turn it over to you.
Great to be here, Lee. Thank you for the coffee.
My pleasure.
It's black, just like I have them in my mirror. So I'll have them of the shadows of life. But you spoke about being guided with the pillars. And I guess you have to look to, I'll start with where I'm at now.
Yeah.
And where I've come from. But a sense I'll call it the COVID miracle. For me, I get up early in the morning. I get up at 3 a.m, go out for 5 days a week and go on a 15-kilometer run. And there I have my daily prayer list that I've been praying for people since I was 15. And so what happens is if you become part of my life, I pray for you. And that's, people ask, what does that mean? For me, that's about lifting people out in the light. And the run is concluded by a workout, and I'm a police chaplain for 51 Division. So I usually work out there. And then after that, I go back home, have my shower, take the dog for a walk, and then begin my day. It's that time in the morning that's very much my nurture time before I draw from the well, that enables me to then reach out to others, to care for them, to help them on that journey, whatever that may be. And when you think about what it has meant to me, where I come from, well, I was born at Grace Hospital in Toronto on Church and Bloor. And my parents, there was an Italian, First Catholic and Pentecostal. My mother was raised French Roman Catholic. And then on the journey, we went from the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church, landed in that church when I was 15. And I remember both mom and dad taught us to always care for other people. I guess the first time when you think of faith in action, my mother was involved with volunteering for the Cancer Society. And she had me, I think I was maybe 7, and my brother was 5. We were selling daffodils at the local strip mall. And I guess I call that faith in action because it was very much about caring for other people. Mind you, she dangled the McDonald's gift certificate with us later, and that was my McDonald's much cheaper. And so faith began very early in life. There was ever not a faith moment. And I remember at Alderwood United, the youth group was very active. And what connected me with that group of people was the fact that they were doing Godspell. And it was a drama. It wasn't just a Sunday morning experience, but it was about youth of a large socioeconomic diverse background that seemed to all care for each other and treat each other as equals. Because I remember there was some who were living, well, in foster homes, some who had a full scope of both a traditional nuclear family, whatever that might be. But we were able to be with each other and present with each other.
Yeah, and I think that community is important. And I feel when I reflect on my early experiences of community building, it actually came from church.
Yes.
And that has been a fundamental part of my life. And I wanted to take this opportunity to explore it because while I may not be going to church every single Sunday, I try to live with the basic tenets that I was taught as a kid growing up. And so I wanted to take this moment because I feel the work that you have done as a spiritual director has led down many paths such as social justice, caring for community with kindness and compassion, being an advocate. And so I think spirituality has so many faces and so many meanings. And I thought, as a reverend, what are you seeing, in your congregation? What are you seeing in society? Thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I just came from a 3-day spiritual retreat in Toronto, led by John Philip Newell. And one of his more recent books was Earth and Soul. And he comes at it from not so much a religious perspective, more of a spiritual, in the sense of listening to God in the rocks, in the rivers, in the trees, but learning to listen and be present to and for with each other. And so what I find is that's really, in essence, what people are looking for, about relationship. When you think about having just come through COVID, how did we keep community going? It was nothing short of a miracle, which is good. And it kept people coming back. So as you know, it was 3 years or so ago where all of a sudden the world shut down and we were told not to come near each other. Yeah. But we somehow had to keep coming near each other. And so either we started Zoom or WebEx or whatever platform. So I still remember that first Sunday where, thank goodness, I had done Zoom before, and we kept people connected. Yeah. And Zoom was a good platform to do that because, as you know, it called the Hollywood Squares of connecting. People could still talk with each other. Mind you, we had our own little bumps because I had one funeral, I remember, where two people were chatting away in the middle of the funeral. It was a bit of a comedy moment, but not so much at the end. But it's about remembering how we can be present to each other. And I remember even 3 years ago when we first heard in our neighborhood, Yonge and Eglinton, how even though we were isolated at Mount Pleasant in Eglinton, the Roehampton Hotel morphed into Roehampton Shelter. And there was 250 beds of people that came from other places. And it's just like, that's one of many places. And of course, initially what happened, some of the neighborhood was like, how dare they come into our neighborhood, was what happened in the faith communities. How can we help now? And so what did happen then, and continues to happen, is even though people felt isolated, they knew that the spark and fire, what they call faith, was ignited to care and reach out and not be indifferent. And we did this by offering food. We offered grocery cards. We offered clothes. And then we called the Roehampton Friendly Team. We were meeting monthly online. What can we do now? When we found out in the shelter, what do they need? If I'm talking with my hands, I'm knocking. That's what I do. I'm Italian and French. We created home baskets. So you create 10 home baths. That means when people move from the shelter to permanent housing, and it's like house and a kit. So you have, using a laundry basket, you have pots and pans and linens. But it gave people meaning because it wasn't just praying for people of need. It was doing something for people of need. Now the shelter is coming to an end, as we know many of them are. So we're looking for the next thing. And just like we connect with the Thorncliffe community, where we created backpacks of over 300 of them, and we're realizing there's 7 TCH, Toronto Community Housing buildings on Eglinton that have a food program. So we're seeing that likely as our next, how do we help now moving forward?
Yeah. And, I remember being a member of Met United, our refugee committee, and all that work. And it creates a sense of purpose. And I see so much agency with folks who are out there trying to do more, do better. And when we think about, I guess there's sometimes when we talk about the difference between religion and spirituality, the interfaith of accepting inclusion. One of the things that I believe, and I know that you have always done, is you have always had a wide, open, welcoming stance, and you've always been so inclusive in your leadership. And I always appreciated that because you engaged people in such meaningful ways. And as people watch and listen to a conversation about spirituality, what are some, community building? What are some ways that people can be involved if they might feel like not connected or, seeking ways to be more connected, whether it's community or spirituality? I don't know.
Well, I know in the past year, so one of our members, her hairdresser that's on Bayview, she reached out to us and they're seeing encouraged. And so essentially there's 7 family members that live in Turkey. And initially we were looking to see how we could help them come from Turkey to Canada. But we realized the process, I think it would be about 3 years or so, So we realized that, well, perhaps Turkey to Germany might be more realistic. But we were able to do. We were able to raise about $30,000 or $40,000. And that was by people who were seeking to participate, whether they be part of the faith community or outside of the faith community. And so one of the great things was one of our members connected with the arts community of Bayview. I mean, you probably know this was an Bayview Arts Club. And so by having an arts night, we donated a portion of proceeds towards this fundraising initiative. And it helped people see beyond themselves. And realizing that Kurds have their own religion that's separate from the Muslim tradition. But I remember as we gathered, and we even had what's called an iftar dinner, where in the Muslim tradition where you break the fast, and we told people what we were doing, and they immediately wanted to come together and be together for that. Because we realized that spirituality isn't about a specific faith tradition. It's about many people, many different walks of life. Yet, actually, it was in Regent Park this past spring. And it happened that Ramadan, Passover, and Easter fell almost the same day. And my friend Leonard, this wonderful Jewish man at Regent Park, we had the year before, we had this Passover Seder in his condo where we had 30 people sitting down for dinner. And it was Kristen Whiteham, the local MP person, who said, well, why don't you have a bigger one? And so we did. And then we had about 55, 60 in the Regent Park Community Center. But there were Muslim, there were Jewish, there were Hindu, and Buddhist, you name it. And it was about people coming together. And that's what they call the union today, because we realize when we break bread, we move beyond the ideological conceptions. We move beyond, because we can have panels. Panels are great. But if the panels just to lead to something actionable, what is that about? But the need to take it further. I mean, you asked me about spirituality and faith. And actually, I guess for me, I've always been connected to some community that did something. When I was first ordained, I was settled in Hearst, Ontario, which is 12 hours north of here. There was a letter on my desk that I was sort of just newly arrived, and it said, an invitation to a communauté de bien-être. Now, Hearst was 95% Francophone. My French was about this much, but got a bit more. Keep in mind, as Franco-Ontarian, so it's a bit easier than Parisian. What they did, they were the incubators for every social justice initiative in the immediate neighborhood. They started the Centre Jean Sauvé, the drug rehab counseling place for youth. In a short time, we started we'll call it a soup kitchen, for want of a better word. What it was the different churches hosting a meal weekly. And that's what this committee was able to create. And I was there for 3 years now. The second community I connected to was Mountain Mills, which is outside of Orangeville. Immediately I said, so where can I connect to whatever was helping the neighborhood? And the family transition place, which was a shelter for abused women. Mm. And again, found the people, I call it like-minded, who cared about the community, but cared beyond their own little four walls, whatever that might be. Third community was Maple, Ontario. And I immediately found New York AIDS Committee of York Region. And that was large. I mean, all of a sudden you were connecting with, and it was a funny, because it was all run by volunteers and run by a great dedicated community. They always been said, we missed the boat of funding because you didn't start early. It's back in the 90s. But we were able to raise a lot of awareness and funds. Actually, they have a staff of 3 now. That's how amazing it is. And I was there for 4 years. Then I came down to Metropolitan and met the different agencies, because then, the downtown of Toronto, you have the Salvation Army, you have the Good Shepherd, you have a picture center. What amazed me at the time, especially about Metropolitan at the time, they had the South Cabbagetown Neighborhood Support Group, which was an overnight shelter. They had a refugee sojourn house in the North Building, 50-bed facility. There was 3 different meals per week. The Seventh-day Adventists ran one of them, Rosedale ran another, Metropolitan ran another one. But it was about caring for people with time and volunteerism. And I guess when you look at it, where we start, I guess I grew up in Etobicoke, where who knew for people of need? I grew up in a bungalow and just assumed everyone lived like that. I guess my eyes were opened. It was the summer of 1986 when I worked at the Scott Mission. than day camp. 150 kids, children, 5 to 13. Half are Hispanic. The other half were from the Caribbean. Some are from Flemington Bird. Who knew for Flemington Bird when you open a door? It was the most humbling moment to work and work with these children, to learn about their lives, and to develop a strong relationship of empowerment and growing forward. I remember that year, I worked at the drop-in center. I met homeless people. I'd never met homeless people. And you were stood at the door and you were welcoming people in at night, and you were told if they were drunk, they couldn't come in. Well, there's a great factor. If it's minus 30, as long as someone's not being violent, you let them come in.
Yeah.
And I mean, even though it's the policy, I mean, the policies are there to help guide us, hopefully not be barriers. We sometimes forget that at some point, we are the gatekeepers of those policies.
Absolutely.
And we can change. Sometimes you can't change at the upper level, but you can change on the ground level. And that's the gift we can be in for each one of us with each other. And I remember those first years of Scott Mission helped me see and know that whatever community I land in, I wanted to be part of the instrument of change, whatever that could be.
Yeah. I like that. Being an instrument of change, being engaged in the community and how we do that. And I feel in the world that we live in, sometimes where do people find meaning and a calling? And I think for me that I've always been interested in a calling and trying for better, common good, for better, to do more and to do better. And I think that has been surrounded by people that I know who have inspired me and have led the way. And when I think about the world that we live in now, where things move so fast, it's almost like, how do we create time for that? Every time I talk to people, they're like, oh, I'm so busy. And busy with what? It's our priorities. It's what we choose to invest our time in. And social justice work, that activism, the humbleness of learning. I mean, because you're put into situations that, didn't come from this background, but there's certainly a need in how to work with people with compassion and work with people with empathy and care. Like, I see that in so much of the work that you do. And a part of me asks, like, as a spiritual leader that I see you as, what are common things that you've been, in a reverend for such a long time? Have you seen anything change in what the general need is of people? Or
I would say people need to be in community. And what's happened is, without realizing it, with our devices, we've shifted from a phone conversation, a real-time conversation, to texting and messaging in every platform, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. And it's interesting. I was chatting with different people who were, say, they're psychotherapy, we're talking about mental health and how there's been a shift to mindfulness.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember being part of, mindfulness isn't as impossible as people think it is. I remember being at Gilda's place, which is still in existence in Toronto. We were part of Pathways to Wellness. We created a 7-week series. And my portion was centering meditation and elaborate. And I used music as a tool. And I guess when I was a teenager, I discovered that if you use music as a tool, you can center yourself very quickly. People forget them. I used to use, to get in touch with certain feelings, I would listen to, remember when you had headphones with our record players? And I showed people how, if you listen to this piece of music, where it stirs you, whether it be Carmina Burana, whether it be Madonna or Lady Gaga, it can take you in a different path. And so often when I start one of these, I'll say, how many people meditate? Very few people put up their hand. Then I say, do you listen to music? Yes, you're meditating. And they say, how so? Because you're centering yourself. And that's the beginning. When people realize it's not, I mean, I've listened to some of those tapes are abysmal. When you have those very dry, bone ossified voices supposedly guiding you into meditation. I remember thinking, I can actually do this myself, and I did. And I found that when I would articulate to myself in a group, it worked much better. But it's about helping people know that this is available at all places and time. At a wedding, quite often I'll talk about that you need to unplug, need to have organic conversations. And I said, I could often say the greatest gift you can give to people that are here right now is your time. And as I was sharing with someone, when we talked about my mental health increasing exponentially, we've isolated ourselves. And we don't even realize how many times we screen every call that's coming in. We don't even answer. To have a phone conversation, you have to schedule. How crazy is that? But sometimes we just need to have a spontaneous, organic conversation. I actually thank people when they answer their phone. I said, thank you for answering your phone, because no one does this anymore. And perhaps it sounds baby trite, but that's the simplest thing we can do. We start with being present to each other and for each other. When you see people at a dinner table, at a restaurant, and they're all on their devices, what is that?
Yeah, agreed. 100%. Where's the real entertainment? Do you?
But I know people that go away and have unplugged times. And that can be the beginning of the greatest gift we can be for each other. He said, unfortunately, even before COVID happened, we're already isolated. I think COVID accelerated it even faster than we imagined, because it made all these platforms even more readily available. And people will have a whole friend universe, and they forget that they can actually have friends in real time. And people will say, I don't know how to have friends. Well, just start with have a coffee, whatever that could be.
Oh, yeah. It's all about.
And have a tea or whatever. I remember someone saying to me, I don't drink coffee. Because the beverage is not the point. The coffee is not the point. It's about whatever, having time, whether it be water or soda pop or whatever you want to do, but about taking time out to be present to and for each other. And that's where we can be life-giving to each other. But it's hard, because when everyone's distracting.
I appreciate that about being present. That we are connected in isolation with all the different platforms, because sometimes I'll get messages and I'm like, where did I see that? And you almost have so many options to choose from. You're like, oh, was it this app, this app, this app, this app? And
yes,
that also feels like it creates noise. And I think for me, a part of my intention of having this conversation with you was when I think about refilling the soul, refueling it, rejuvenating, and refueling our tank. I find calm and serenity in prayer. Meditation is a little bit like, I think they're very similar. They serve that function. Yeah. And that power of focus, intention. We may take away a lot of religious words or what have you from it, but the intention is there to be focused, to be mindful. Like, what is mindfulness? What does meditation do? What does listening to music do? And I feel like sometimes, and I can speak for myself, I'm moving like so fast all the time. And I have to stop myself. So like in the morning time, I have to take those moments, if I can find it before my youngest wakes up, to like meditate, just to kind of ground myself and all the things come. And as a child, my mother taught me how to pray, right? And to reflect on the people that you care about. And so my intention with this conversation really was, what do we need to come back to maybe? What do we need to expand? What do we need to pause from doing? Like, we've picked up these habits of being on our phone all the time. I know in our household, we don't have phones at the table. We try to be very, to make a concerted effort to be present for a meal that we share and talk to each other.
You mentioned a couple of things when I think of how to be present to each other. And perhaps it's I remember listening to CBC, and they talked about mealtime. And they said that's when they go to grandma's house, whatever that might be. But I remember even when there was a study done with people who are all homeless or living in shelters, and they used the example, what are they looking for? An experience of going to grandma's house. So really what they wanted was the community table moment. And as much as, if you think of homeless people as one example, when you go to you have a meal at a table, if there's not a connectivity, if they're just isolated eating their dinner, and sometimes they'll have friendly visitors where they can connect the table. And then, mind you, you have to plow through a lot of thick fear to do that. But that's the beginning.
Yeah.
Where something can happen. And good for you that you do the unplugged mealtime, because that's the, and you think of the slow food movement where it's not about in a hurry. I remember, what was it? There was a film, Blackwater Light Show, where it talked about having a cup of tea. And a cup of tea is a good example because you can't hurry tea. You have to wait for the kettle to boil, and then you have to let the tea sit in the bag. And then while all that's happening, you've had a lot of conversation.
Yes.
But it's about taking space and time for that conversation in the here and now. And so often when people come to me and they might feel lonely or isolated, I'll say to themselves, what are you doing for yourself? How are you recreating yourself? And quite often the answer will be nothing. And then I said, so what are you doing for others? And quite often they'll say nothing. And sometimes they are doing a lot for others, but they don't realize they're doing a lot for others. And maybe they just need to also do something for themselves, whatever that may be. Going for a walk. Some people get a dog and they shouldn't do that because maybe they're not so good at dogs. And some people join a gym and figure that's the answer. But I always find it's interesting, as a person who's a gym maniac myself, is the conversations that happen at the gym. But you know what's happened nowadays at gyms? The
earbuds?
Yeah. You can't
Talk to people.
necessarily. You have to shout at them. And then they have to do this. And then, so you almost wonder what's happened there, where it used to be a great time, but they went at the same time. There was a whole community that developed over time, and they know you. But even that's become interrupted. And so perhaps, as much as earbuds are lovely and helpful, you can't even go for a walk now. People are, their earbuds are on, right?
It's true. I've seen friends, and I want to be like, hey, how are you? And they're like, shh. And I'm like, oh, they've got earbuds in.
And not to sound judgmental, the one thing I find really bizarre is when you see a parent with a stroller and they have the earbuds and they're talking on the phone to somebody else, and their child that's right there, they're missing a moment.
Yeah.
They're missing the parenting moment. I said this to you because you know what I'm talking about as a parent, but you wonder, that's even interrupted because they think they're connected. They're not connecting because they should be talking to their child, even if they're 5 or 6 months old. But it's almost like we've forgotten that we need to talk to the person that's in front of us.
It's true. It seems so simple, but it's so.
As you and I are talking now, we're not picking up our phones. We're not checking our Facebook. We're not seeing how many likes we have.
It doesn't matter.
No. But you mentioned about religion. You see, I guess one of the challenges is sometimes religion gets in the way of spirituality because we create a whole bunch of doctrine and principles. And I've been blessed by knowing many people of many different traditions. And I'm always so curious. Right around the corner of where we live in Cabbagetown, with my husband, we have a Hindu temple. And it's amazing, in a place that was originally a mechanic's garage, they transformed this and they actually give out free food every day. And there's all they have Ganesh, which is a
remover of obstacles.
But also there's the elephant.
Mm-hmm.
But and I said, also about listening. What a great idea. What a great principle. And every summer they have this 3-day festival of Ganesh, and they parade Ganesh around the neighborhood. And it's amazing to see this because you have 300 people who wander through the neighborhood at full caution. We need Ganesh, whatever tradition we might be in, because we need to learn to listen again. And one of the tools, even if you're not religious, that I found is very helpful for me is a labyrinth, which goes back several thousands of years and guides the walker into what's at the center, what's at the edge. And if you wonder where one might be, if you're on the west side of the east side, there's a great outdoor labyrinth right now. But it leads people to connect what's inside to what's outside. Because so often, because we do put up roadblocks, we almost have the Iron Man armor to protect ourselves because we are vulnerable, we are wounded, we are hurt. We have a person who we know who dies. We have people lose their job. People are trying to work and make ends meet. We were talking about food earlier. How do we purchase food nowadays when it's so expensive? How to live on a budget? How to live with a healthy means when everything's so fast and fast forward? Perhaps it's about information sharing. Perhaps it's about understanding from different cultures and cuisines what that can be. And in that moment, we learn a bit of the table sharing that could happen. Because some people, well, right now, they may be single. But sometimes people figure out, well, let's sit down and have a meal together. But it's about taking time in the busy time.
Yeah.
To be present to each other.
Now, I appreciate that. We've had such a great conversation and talking about being present, about taking time, taking care of yourself, having tea, right? You have your favorite quote, which I always love to ask about, and it's from Walt Whitman. And so maybe I'll read it, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about why this is your favorite quote. Camarado, I give you my hand. I give you my love more precious than money. I give you myself before preaching or law. Will you give me yourself? Will you come travel with me? Shall we stick by each other as long as we live?
I stumbled across that. It comes from a poem that's about 3 pages long. And it's called Song of the Open Road. And some people say poetry is a lost art. No, it isn't. It's right there waiting for us. And sometimes people say they don't read poem. And I say to them, actually, you do. You probably listen to music, and lyrics are a form of poetry anyway. That's another.
Comes back to music.
There you go. Yes. But if you think of the image, it's about life as a road. Every culture and tradition has a story about walking on the road. I remember what we used to call grade 13. There was a great book called Siddhartha.
Yes.
By Herman Hesse. And it was about road walking. And it was a good book to have in grade 13 because here's about, if I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be about the life of the Buddha, and he starts as a wealthy person, ends up being a river. A
little bit whitewashed, but yes.
They don't talk about the great suffering.
Yes,
Yes, but they talk about being one with the river. But the great part is the meandering road along the way, all the different people we've met. And what's, I guess, been amazing for me is I was very fortunate when I was much younger. I had mentors who stood at the crossroads and were like lighthouses, so to speak, or compass. People have helped me find my compass, whatever that might be, and knowing which way to turn. Or for me, it's about not necessarily knowing which way to turn. It's not being afraid to turn left, turn right. So often I'll jump in the deep end of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, I'm not sure where shore is, but I'm going to find it one way or the other. And that goes back to perhaps we were talking earlier about Myers-Briggs, about being in J and being an intuitive person. But it's about knowing somehow that the bridge will be there regardless of the outcome. And it goes back to when I do run in the morning.
Yeah.
I find that a great problem-solving moment, because sometimes all I'm asking for, oh God, help me to know the way forward. And that could be a conflict with the person, a problem I may have in an organization or something. But sorting, I call it the sorting moment. Think of Harry Potter sorting out.
Yeah.
And so often there is, I haven't thought of that path. And that's about that image of, Camarado, I give you my hand. Because it's knowing that whoever that person might be, that I am never alone. For me, so often I meet people and they ask me about faith. I said, well, faith has always been for me. I've never not been. Well, who is God? I said, God is here. And I think the Buddhists have a great way to put God is within us. And I remember a friend of mine who was an atheist. He said, well, I don't believe in God. He was very, disenfranchised, recovering Catholic, let's put it that. There's recovering everybody.
Yeah.
But I said, and because he was a great artist, and I saw in him a great spirit. And I said, Laurent, you are this life effervescent, flowing, creative person. Where else does that come by the source? I said, think of this. What if God is a sum total of all creation, that then we're part of all that? And he said, okay, I can live with that. And so often we other God, and even further, we other. Because so often we forget that God is part of everything, intricate, and it's bigger than the rock, it's bigger than the trees, because it's also what's outside the earth, outside our cosmos. Whether or not we believe in other people for other planets is irrelevant, because I personally do myself. one day we'll meet them. I'm sure they're saying, they're not ready yet.
Yeah.
But it's about here and now. And what I would ask people as I'm meeting with them, how do you want to make a difference right now in your community? And that's where you'll find spirituality for you today.
That's really powerful. It's very simple, but it's so truthful. Thank you so much for sharing with me. You're just who you are. And I really appreciate that. What I take away, faith in living, faith in action, faith in doing, being present, the power of guidance from mentors and community by reaching out, by having that connection with folks, by doing all those things of being present and having faith. And that has certainly been something that has come to me repetitively, reminding me, trust in the process, trust in what is to come. And I always say, put it out into the universe and the universe will respond. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Li. It's been an honor to be here today with you.
It's always a pleasure with you.